Excellences, Madame la conseillère d'État, Madame la vice-présidente du conseil administratif de la ville de Genève, Mesdames et Messieurs les représentants des organisations diplomatiques à Genève, Mesdames et Messieurs les représentants des récipiendaires du prix Nobel de la paix 2022, Monsieur le professeur, Monsieur le président de la Semaine des droits humains, chers collègues, chers invités, chers amis, chères étudiantes et chers étudiants, Mesdames et Messieurs. C'est avec un immense plaisir que l'Université de Genève vous accueille aujourd'hui pour inaugurer cette Semaine des droits humains. C'est une semaine qui est dédiée à la réflexion, au débat, à l'engagement. Une semaine qui nous invite à nous pencher sur des enjeux fondamentaux qui touchent nos sociétés, mais aussi à faire le point sur notre rôle en tant qu'institution académique dans la défense et la promotion de ces droits. L'université est un lieu de savoir, certes, mais elle est aussi et avant tout un lieu de dialogue, de pensée critique et je dirais même d'émancipation intellectuelle. C'est dans cet espace de réflexion libre, de confrontation d'idées, de rencontre avec la pensée d'hier et d'aujourd'hui, que nous avons la possibilité de questionner, de redéfinir et de réinventer le monde dans lequel nous vivons. Notre responsabilité en tant qu'université ne se limite pas à la formation de nos étudiantes et de nos étudiants, ni à la production et à la conservation des savoirs. Nous avons un rôle fondamental à jouer dans la société en nourrissant le débat public, en ouvrant des espaces de réflexion sur les grandes questions qui traversent notre époque. Cette semaine des droits humains est une formidable occasion de faire vibrer cette mission. Cette semaine est un croisement exemplaire entre la recherche, l'enseignement et l'engagement citoyen. En donnant la parole à la pluralité des voix, qu'elles soient académiques, étudiantes, militantes, citoyennes ou artistiques, nous affirmons haut et fort que l'université n'est pas une tour d'ivoire coupée des réalités qui façonnent notre monde. Au contraire, elle est un acteur, une actrice vivante en interaction constante avec la société et ses préoccupations. Rassembler toutes ces voix, créer des ponts entre différentes disciplines, différentes expériences, mais aussi différentes manières de penser les droits humains, est indispensable. Nous devons être capables d'écouter, de débattre, de comprendre et de remettre en question nos propres certitudes. Ce n'est qu'en confrontant les idées et en échangeant avec les autres que nous pourrons progresser ensemble. En tant qu'université, nous sommes également et surtout un acteur du bien commun. La défense de la liberté académique et de la pensée critique est au cœur de notre mission. Ces valeurs sont des piliers essentiels de l'État de droit et de toute véritable démocratie. L'université doit être un espace où la liberté d'expression, la libre expression des idées est protégée, où la recherche peut s'épanouir sans contrainte, où les chercheuses et les chercheurs, les étudiantes et les étudiants peuvent développer une pensée critique sans crainte de répression ou de censure. Dans un monde qui semble à l'heure actuelle de plus en plus polarisé, nous avons un devoir de promouvoir une pensée ouverte, une pensée qui ose, qui interroge, qui défend la dignité humaine et les droits universels. Cette semaine des droits humains ne doit donc pas être un moment figé dans le temps, mais plutôt une invitation à nous interroger et à nous engager en tant qu'acteurs, actrices de l'éducation et du savoir. Je vous remercie toutes et tous de participer à cette conférence d'ouverture et je vous encourage à suivre les autres événements de la semaine et à poser des questions, à remettre en question les évidences, à vous engager dans des conversations qui, je l'espère, dépasseront cette semaine et continueront à enrichir notre vie universitaire et notre société dans son ensemble. Je vous souhaite une très bonne conférence et une très bonne semaine.
Les salutations protocolaires ayant été prononcées par la rectrice, permettez-moi de vous saluer, mesdames et messieurs, en vos titres et fonctions respectives. C'est avec une grande joie et aussi une certaine gravité que je vous souhaite la bienvenue à cette Semaine des droits humains 2025, consacrée cette année à un thème d'une brûlante actualité, défendre l'état de droit. Permettez-moi préalablement de remercier chaleureusement celles et ceux qui rendent cet événement possible et cette semaine organisée, à savoir nos partenaires institutionnels, le département fédéral des affaires étrangères, le canton, ainsi que la ville de Genève, nos partenaires associatifs et universitaires, que sont les associations étudiantes, bien évidemment, qui permettent, dans une collaboration fidèle, de faire de cette semaine un dialogue unique entre le monde académique et la société civile. Je tiens également à saluer plus précisément la communauté étudiante, ainsi que les étudiantes et étudiants du comité de pilotage qui ont participé activement à la conception du programme, rappelant que la défense des droits humains commence aussi par la participation, la délibération et l'engagement collectif. Enfin, et concernant cette conférence d'ouverture, je tiens à remercier plus spécifiquement et chaleureusement mes deux collègues sans qui elle n'aurait pas pu être organisée, à savoir le docteur Jacopo Ada, coordinateur scientifique de cette Semaine des droits humains, et la professeure Corinne Amacher, qui dirige au sein du Global Studies Institute le LABEAC, le laboratoire Europe centrale et orientale, Asie centrale et Caucase, mais aussi l'association Mémoire, et notamment la section suisse et internationale, sans laquelle il aurait été impossible de permettre à nos 3 lauréates et lauréats du prix Nobel d'être présents avec nous ce soir. C'est donc un honneur que d'accueillir nos récipiendaires du prix Nobel de la paix 2022 pour une conférence intitulée « Defending the Rule of Law, Defending Human Rights ». Et notamment, Madame Oleksandra Matviitchouk, présidente de Center for Civil Liberties en Ukraine, Madame Natallia Satsounkevitch, membre du conseil d'administration provisoire de Viasna en Biélorussie, et enfin M. Alexandre Tcherkassov, président du conseil d'administration du Centre des droits humains Mémorial en Russie. Et puis bien évidemment, nous avons une pensée toute particulière ce soir pour Bialiatski, fondateur de Viasna, aujourd'hui emprisonné en Biélorussie. Nos 3 lauréats dialogueront dans un instant avec le professeur Benjamin Schenk de l'université de Bâle, que je remercie chaleureusement, slaviste reconnu et qui a accepté notre invitation d'articuler avec nous la table ronde de ce soir. Et puis bien évidemment, cher public, vous aurez la possibilité de suivre, en vous équipant des casques si nécessaire, les propos qui seront tenus en russe et en anglais. Nous vous rappelons aussi que toute intervention, aux questions, remarques, se doit de respecter la charte d'éthique et de déontologie de l'Université de Genève, laquelle garantit le caractère démocratique de notre espace de discussion, espace qui aujourd'hui est important de préserver et de défendre. C'est donc un honneur que d'accueillir ces 3 personnalités récompensées pour leur engagement, souvent au péril de leur liberté. Leur combat incarne celui d'une partie de la société civile des 3 pays qui sont soit en guerre, en résistance ou en exil, et illustre avec force ce que signifie défendre l'état de droit contre la peur, contre la violence, mais aussi contre l'arbitraire. La Semaine des droits humains est par excellence et par essence un espace de réflexion, de débat et d'engagement. Un espace de réflexion parce qu'il nous invite à penser les défis contemporains des droits humains avec lucidité. Un espace de débat parce qu'il repose sur la confrontation respectueuse d'idées mais aussi de discipline. Enfin, c'est un espace d'engagement parce qu'il nous rappelle que les droits humains ne se défendent pas seulement dans les textes, mais aussi dans les actes, les institutions et les choix quotidiens. Ce n'est donc pas un hasard si le thème de cette édition et sa formulation a un caractère militant, défendre l'état de droit. Le paradigme de l'état de droit, qui trouve son origine en Allemagne, en France et au Royaume-Uni à partir du XIXe siècle, a connu, dans le dernier quart du siècle dernier, une forme d'apogée. Pour autant, aujourd'hui, dans le contexte mondial que nous connaissons, et l'ouverture de cette conférence permettra de le montrer, il est aujourd'hui montré et identifié par de profondes inquiétudes et qui vont jusqu'à remettre en cause les fondements de cet état de droit, et notamment à la lecture de la montée de la doctrine illibérale, par exemple, la fragilisation des libertés fondamentales et la remise en cause du multilatéralisme, pourtant essentiel à la coopération internationale et à la paix. Partout, les démocraties vacillent, les contre-pouvoirs s'affaiblissent et les discours de haine ou de repli gagnent du terrain. Dans ce climat, l'état de droit demeure notre boussole, et notre boussole commune, car il n'est pas seulement un cadre juridique, il est aussi une promesse politique et une promesse morale. Celle d'un pouvoir limité par la loi, celle d'une justice indépendante et accessible à tous, celle d'une société où la dignité de chaque être humain prime sur la raison d'État. Mais l'état de droit n'est jamais acquis. Il se construit, il se défend et se réinvente face aux crises contemporaines. Crise sécuritaire, par exemple, qui met à l'épreuve l'équilibre entre sécurité et liberté, crise climatique et migratoire, qui rappelle à repenser la solidarité au-delà des frontières, crise numérique, enfin, qui pose la question du contrôle de la vie privée et de la désinformation. Défendre l'état de droit, c'est donc aussi défendre sa résilience, sa capacité à s'adapter sans renoncer à ses principes. Précisément, et tout au long de cette semaine, nous aurons l'occasion d'approfondir ces enjeux. L'édition 2025 de cette Semaine des droits humains commence ouvre avec cette conférence inaugurale et nos lauréates et lauréats du prix Nobel de la paix, et va se poursuivre dès demain avec plus d'une vingtaine de manifestations académiques et grand public, ainsi que plusieurs expositions et événements artistiques, photographies, théâtre-forum, danse, qui rappellent aussi que la création est aussi une forme d'engagement. Et depuis plusieurs années, nous mettons un point d'honneur à associer pleinement artistes, comédiens, dans cette réflexion académique à laquelle s'insère aussi, et nous intégrons, la société civile. Mesdames et messieurs, défendre l'état de droit, c'est défendre l'idée même d'une humanité partagée. C'est refuser la peur, l'indifférence et la résignation. Défendre l'état de droit, c'est défendre la possibilité même de vivre en démocratie. Plus que jamais, il nous appartient de rappeler que sans l'état de droit, nous cesserons d'être des citoyennes et des citoyens pour devenir de simples sujets. Enfin, défendre l'état de droit, c'est affirmer ici, à Genève, ville du droit international, du dialogue et de la paix, que l'engagement académique et citoyen reste nos meilleures armes contre les dérives autoritaires et notre plus sûr horizon commun. Je vous souhaite à toutes et à tous une semaine des droits humains riche, stimulante et inspirante. Et j'invite maintenant Madame Christina Kitsos, vice-présidente du conseil administratif de la ville de Genève, chargée du département de la cohésion sociale et de la solidarité, à me rejoindre sur scène. Je vous remercie.
Mesdames, Messieurs, c'est un plaisir d'être parmi vous ce soir et de vous adresser les salutations de la ville de Genève. Reconnaître que l'état de droit se fragilise ne doit pas nous mener au fatalisme, malgré tout ce que nous pouvons voir dans l'actualité ces dernières semaines, ces derniers mois, même ces dernières années. Au contraire, ce constat doit stimuler notre mobilisation collective pour le défendre, l'adapter aux défis contemporains, à ces enjeux qui viennent d'être cités, que ce soit les inégalités sociales, que ce soit la crise climatique, les conflits, les guerres qui ravagent un certain nombre de contrées. Et puis de pouvoir transmettre cet état de droit, ces valeurs qu'il suppose aux générations futures. Nous le savons, sans une presse forte, indépendante et critique, il n'y a pas d'état de droit. Partout dans le monde, et parfois plus près de nous qu'on ne le croit, cette liberté fondamentale est compromise. Les menaces contre la liberté d'expression ne se limitent pas au régime autoritaire, bien que nous voyons de plus en plus de régimes autoritaires apparaître. En l'espace de 20 ans, c'est incroyable de voir la progression de cet autoritarisme. Mais il est vrai que dans nos démocraties aussi, des lois liberticides, des pressions politiques et économiques, ou encore des restructurations incessantes affaiblissent progressivement la capacité des journalistes à exercer leur métier en toute indépendance. Le classement mondial 2024 de Reporters sans frontières est sans appel. Un nombre croissant de gouvernements n'assurent plus leur rôle de garant du droit du public à une information fiable, indépendante et plurielle. La concentration des médias entre les mains de quelques grands groupes accentue ce risque. Ici aussi, en Suisse, on le constate. Certains privilégient désormais le buzz, si on peut encore utiliser ce terme, le divertissement, plutôt que la fonction critique du journalisme, quand il ne verse pas dans une propagande pure et simple. Aujourd'hui, dans certaines sphères, on l'a vu, exprimer une opinion divergente ou tout simplement publier un dessin caustique peut exposer à des campagnes de harcèlement, à des sanctions professionnelles, à des poursuites judiciaires abusives, voire au meurtre. Le rapport de Reporters sans frontières est glaçant. 104 journalistes ont été tués en 2024 pour avoir exercé leur métier. Mais la liberté de la presse ne suffit pas si nous laissons prospérer aussi la désinformation. Alors la désinformation, elle ne vient pas d'apparaître, il y a toujours eu des formes de désinformation, puisque l'information est le pouvoir, de quelque manière que ce soit. Mais c'est vrai que ces fausses nouvelles sont amplifiées par les réseaux, par l'absence aussi de modération sur ces mêmes réseaux, et s'accompagne d'une polarisation extrême des opinions qui empoisonne, in fine, le débat démocratique. Face à ce défi, il est essentiel de soutenir un journalisme de qualité, d'éduquer à l'esprit critique et de renforcer l'accès à une information vérifiée. Au-delà de l'information, comme je suis à la tête du département de la cohésion sociale de la solidarité, je voulais aussi mettre en exergue l'importance ou même l'exigence de la justice sociale pour pouvoir sauvegarder quelque part un état de droit. Parce qu'on le voit, les inégalités économiques et sociales, lorsqu'elles se creusent, menacent les fondements mêmes de cet état de droit. Comment en effet croire en l'égalité devant la loi quand l'accès au logement, à l'éducation, aux soins dépend de sa condition sociale ? Comment avoir confiance dans les institutions quand certains quartiers cumulent les difficultés pendant que d'autres concentrent les privilèges ? L'état de droit reste une promesse vide si, dans les faits, certaines de nos concitoyennes, certains de nos concitoyens subissent des injustices. Les discriminations, les violences fondées sur l'origine, le genre, le handicap, l'orientation sexuelle, l'âge, sont autant d'atteintes à la dignité humaine que nous ne pouvons tolérer. Notre engagement doit être concret, garantir l'égalité d'accès à la justice, à la formation, au travail, à des conditions d'existence dignes. Et cette exigence de justice sociale trouve son expression la plus concrète dans la cohésion qui unit toute société. Elle repose sur la capacité à vivre ensemble malgré les différences, à construire un projet commun au-delà de la diversité des parcours, des origines, des cultures. La cohésion sociale est une condition sine qua non de la démocratie, mais elle ne va jamais de soi. C'est précisément ici que les politiques de proximité prennent tout leur sens. La défense de l'état de droit commence déjà dans les écoles, dans les crèches, dans l'espace public, dans l'accès à l'information, le soutien aux actrices et acteurs de terrain, et notamment aux associations. Comme l'a dit Eleanor Roosevelt en 1958, je cite, « Où commencent les droits universels après tout ? Ils commencent près de chez soi, en des lieux si proches et si petits qu'on ne peut les voir sur aucune carte du monde. » Et en effet, je pense que la proximité crée de la confiance. C'est cette proximité qui permet de renforcer un sentiment d'appartenance à une communauté et de pouvoir, à travers ce premier maillon politique de la vie sociale et économique, pouvoir équilibrer, redistribuer les richesses et renforcer ainsi la cohésion sociale. Et je pense aussi que souvent les villes représentent les derniers remparts contre les inégalités. Mesdames, Messieurs, l'histoire nous enseigne que les démocraties ne s'effondrent jamais d'un coup. Elles s'érodent lentement par petites concessions successives, par des silences complices, par indifférence. En cette période de bascule, une vigilance collective s'impose et rappelons-nous que l'état de droit se défend dans nos choix et gestes quotidiens, quelle que soit notre fonction, même si, bien entendu, lorsqu'on a des fonctions politiques ou des fonctions de décision, eh bien, on a une responsabilité bien plus importante. Mais chacune et chacun de nous avons un devoir de refuser la résignation et de faire preuve d'une capacité à nous élever, toutes et tous, contre toute forme d'injustice, d'intolérance et de haine. Merci de votre attention. Et je cède la parole à Madame la conseillère d'État, Nathalie Fontanet.
Mesdames et messieurs, en vos titres et fonctions, laissez-moi vous dire à quel point je suis heureuse d'être parmi vous ce soir et de représenter le Conseil d'État du canton et République de Genève. Quand on évoque l'état de droit, on pense spontanément à nos institutions nationales, à la séparation des pouvoirs, aux limites qui sont imposées à l'autorité pour protéger les libertés individuelles. Nos ancêtres ont inventé ce système pour empêcher le pire au sein d'une population dont l'histoire nous a appris qu'elle pouvait se retourner contre elle-même. Le droit international procède de la même intuition. C'est l'état de droit appliqué aux relations entre les nations. Au fil des siècles, l'humanité a compris une vérité fondamentale. Sans règles communes et sans respect mutuel, c'est assurément le règne de la violence et de l'arbitraire. Cette conviction a donné naissance au droit international moderne, celui qui interdit les crimes de guerre, les crimes contre l'humanité, les génocides. Ce principe n'est pas qu'une aspiration morale, c'est le fondement de nos démocraties, de la coopération internationale, du multilatéralisme. C'est ce qui nous sépare de la haine et du chaos. Où en sommes-nous à présent ? Aujourd'hui, le CICR recense plus de 130 conflits armés dans le monde. C'est un niveau jamais atteint depuis des décennies. Derrière cette statistique alarmante se cachent de profondes tragédies humaines. Des femmes, des enfants, des hommes, des personnes âgées et des personnes handicapées dont la vie et le destin ont été bouleversés et brisés. Soyons lucides, le droit international est bafoué sur de nombreux théâtres d'opérations. Face aux conflits, aux inégalités, aux violences et au non-respect de la dignité humaine, il est impératif de renforcer le multilatéralisme et le respect du droit international. Se résigner, se replier ou se diviser serait une grave erreur. le rôle de la Genève internationale n'a jamais été aussi crucial. Depuis la création du Comité international de la Croix-Rouge en 1863, l'adoption de la première Convention de Genève en 1864, qui marque la naissance du droit international humanitaire, et l'installation de la SDN en 1920, notre canton s'est imposé comme un symbole de paix, d'idéal universel et d'humanisme qui transcende les frontières et les particularismes. C'est ici qu'est née la première déclaration des droits de l'enfant. C'est ici, à Genève, que les droits humains universels ont pris forme en 1948. C'est aussi ici que le passeport Nansen a offert protection aux apatrides. Préserver la Genève internationale, c'est soutenir les valeurs de solidarité, de paix, de coopération et de respect des droits humains. C'est aussi donner une place au pouvoir de la médiation et de la négociation. Et nous savons combien ces valeurs aujourd'hui, sous pression, sont essentielles. Genève est l'un des rares endroits sur cette planète où les valeurs universelles deviennent des actions concrètes. Aux personnes qui questionnent aujourd'hui le multilatéralisme et la nécessité d'un monde avec des règles communes, où le dialogue et la confiance mutuelle sont possibles, eh bien, il faut opposer la vérité suivante. Quiconque n'aime pas le droit n'aime pas la paix. Ce d'autant que notre destin est plus lié que jamais. Le climat, les pandémies, les crises économiques ignorent les frontières et constituent des défis que nous ne pouvons que relever ensemble. Préserver la force normative et la légitimité du droit international n'est pas une option aujourd'hui. C'est un devoir éthique, un devoir civique de première importance. Mesdames et messieurs, en défendant l'état de droit, défendons l'humanité elle-même. Et en préservant la Genève internationale comme lieu de dialogue, eh bien, nous préservons la possibilité d'un monde plus juste. Je vous remercie pour votre attention.
Je remercie aux autorités politiques et à notre rectrice pour ces paroles fortes qui rappellent que peut-être Genève, et c'est peut-être même pas une interrogation, a un rôle à jouer dans cette problématique qui est de défendre l'état de droit localement, cantonalement et je dirais internationalement. Et je pense qu'un espace comme le nôtre, ici, avec vous, chères étudiantes et étudiants et chers collègues, nous pouvons y contribuer. C'est d'ailleurs tout l'objectif et l'enjeu de cette Semaine des droits humains. J'ai maintenant le plaisir d'accueillir le professeur Cheng de l'Université de Bâle, qui va préalablement contextualiser et introduire non seulement nos 3 récipiendaires du prix Nobel de la paix, mais aussi le contexte lié au thème principal de cette soirée, lié à la défense de l'état de droit. Professeur Cheng, chers collègues, c'est à vous.
Merci beaucoup pour l'invitation et je immédiatement change les langues et je vais parler en anglais et je m'excuse, mais après on va aussi avoir le discours en anglais. On the 7th of October 2022, the Norwegian Nobel Committee announced its decision to award the 2022 Nobel Peace Prize to Bialiatski of Belarus, the Ukrainian Human Rights Organization Center for Civil Liberties, and the Russian Human Rights Organization Memorial. In announcing its decision, the Nobel Committee emphasized that the 3 laureates, and I quote, have promoted the right to criticize those in power and protect the fundamental rights of citizens. They have made an outstanding effort to document war crimes, human rights abuses, and the abuses of power. Together, they demonstrate the significance of civil society for peace and democracy. End of quote. It is a special honor for me to welcome Oleksandra Matviitchouk, Natallia Satsounkevitch, and Alexandre Tcherkassov, prominent representatives of the NGOs honored 3 years ago here in Geneva today. After the fall of the Berlin Wall in November 1989 and the unexpected dissolution of the Soviet Union in December 1991, people both in East and West dreamt of a democratic, peaceful, and united Europe, a continent that had overcome the dark ages of totalitarian rule, a continent where all people would enjoy the rule of law and the unrestricted protection of human rights. Today, 35 years after these world historical events of 1989 and 1991, we know that this dream has not come true. Belarus has been ruled uninterruptedly since 1994 by dictator Alexander Lukashenko. Following the witched presidential election and the unsuccessful peaceful revolution of 2020, which was brutally suppressed with Russian support, Lukashenko effectively turned Belarus into a vassal state of Russia, imprisoning since 2020 more than 9,000 political prisoners, and today more than 1,200 political dissidents are jailed in Belarus. In Russia, President Putin has systematically transformed the country into an authoritarian state since the early 2000s, undermining the institutions of the legislature and judiciary and turning them into compliant tools of the executive power. Putin has abolished freedom of the press, destroyed the pillars of civil society, and sent hundreds of dissidents to panel camps. During the Revolution of Dignity in 2013-14, Ukraine made an unprecedented collective effort to break free from Russia's grip and overthrow the kleptocratic regime of Viktor Yanukovych. In response, Russia breached international law by annexing the Ukrainian peninsula of Crimea and starting an undeclared war in the Donbass against its western neighbor. Since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion on 24th of February 2022, Russia has been waging a brutal war of aggression against Ukraine and its people, aiming at the destruction of a democratic and independent Ukraine. For over a decade, the people of Ukraine and its civil society have been standing up to Russian neo-imperialism and bravely defending Europe's security, democracy, the rule of law, and human rights. Their actions have won them the admiration and fascination of the entire European continent. We in the West, not at least we in Switzerland, who are accustomed and almost spoiled by peace, have the privilege of being born in a country where previous generations fought and struggled for freedom, democracy, the rule of law, and the respect of human rights. For a long time, we took these achievements for granted. For a long time, we believed that these historical developments were irreversible. For several years now, we have witnessed attacks on freedom and democracy in Europe and America, both from outside and within. We are concerned by the rise of populist and authoritarian governments and by the threats to democracy, the separation of powers, the rule of law, and freedom of the press in many Western countries. The enemies of our democracies are receiving massive backing from autocratic leaders such as those in Russia. However, not everyone here wants to recognize that the struggle of our friends in Ukraine against Russian aggression and the struggle of Belarusian and Russian human rights activists for democracy and the rule of law directly affects us in the West. Their fight for freedom and democracy is also our fight for freedom and democracy. It is high time we listened carefully to the courageous people of Eastern Europe who have spent over 30 years working to protect democracy, the rule of law, and human rights. Before I give the floor to our esteemed guests and invite them to engage in a dialogue with each other and with us in the conference room, I would like to briefly introduce Oleksandra Matviitchouk, Natallia Satsounkevitch, and Alexandre Tcherkassov. Oleksandra Matviitchouk is the chairwoman of the Ukrainian human rights organization Center for Civil Liberties. Founded in Kyiv in 2007, the Center for Civil Liberties aims to advance human rights and democracy in Ukraine and the whole OSCE region. It has taken a stand to strengthen Ukrainian civil society and pressure the authorities to make Ukraine a fully fledged democracy. The Center for Civil Liberties was the first human rights organization to send its own mobile teams to document war crimes in the Crimea, Donetsk, and Luhansk regions in 2014. To this day, the center continues to do so in all regions where Russian troops have committed crimes. In collaboration with international partners, the center is playing a pioneering role in holding the guilty parties accountable and restoring justice for all victims of war crimes. As part of her work at the Center for Civil Liberties, Oleksandra Matviitchouk has been involved also in other human rights projects, including, for example, the Euromaidan SOS initiative. In this context, her organization united several thousand people, and during all 3 months of the protest of the Revolution of Dignity, defended the participants persecuted by the authorities in various regions of the country. Oleksandra Matviitchouk is a lawyer by training and has received numerous awards for her work. These include, for example, 2016 Democracy Defender Award from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Natallia Satsounkevitch is a member of the interim board of the Viasna Human Rights Center, one of the leading human rights organizations in Belarus. Its founder, Ales Bialiatski, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2022 and sentenced to 10 years of prison the following year. Ales Bialiatski was one of the initiators of the democracy movement that emerged in Belarus in the mid-1980s. In 1996, he founded the organization Viasna, which can be translated into spring, in response to controversial constitutional amendments that granted the presidential dictatorial powers and triggered widespread demonstrations. Viasna supported the detained protesters and their families. Over the following years, it developed into a broad-based human rights organization that documented and protested against the torture of political prisoners by the Belarusian authorities. The government repeatedly attempted to silence Ales Bialiatski and his friends. He was imprisoned from 2011 to 2014 following the large-scale demonstrations against the regime of Alexander Lukashenko in 2020. He and other members of the Viasna organization, such as Marfa Rabkova or Valentin Stefanovic, were arrested in 2021. On March 2023, Bialiatski was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment, and today more than 1,200 political prisoners in Belarus are still waiting their release. The work of Viasna is continuing thanks to the efforts of courageous colleagues in exile, such as Natallia Satsounkevitch. A biologist by training, she started her human rights work by joining Viasna as a volunteer in 2015. Since then, she has gained extensive experience in human rights monitoring, including monitoring court hearings, elections, and assemblies. Due to her activism, Natallia is currently facing criminal prosecution in Belarus, and therefore she lives currently in Vilnius, Lithuania. Last but not least, I would like to welcome Alexandre Tcherkassov, the co-founder and former chair of the Memorial Human Rights Center. Memorial was founded in 1987 by human rights activists from the former Soviet Union who were determined to ensure that the victims of communist oppression would never be forgotten. The organization Memorial is based on the idea that confronting past crimes is vital for preventing new ones. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Memorial grew to become the largest human rights organization in Russia. As well as establishing a center of documentation on victims of the Stalinist era, Memorial has compiled and systematized information on political oppression and human rights violation in today's Russia. The organization has also been at the forefront of efforts to combat militarism and protect human rights and a government based on the rule of law. For many years, civil society actors in Russia have been subjected to threats, imprisonment, disappearance, and murder. The government's harassment of Memorial included the organization being labeled a foreign agent in the early stages. In December 2021, the authorities ordered the forced liquidation of Memorial and the permanent closure of its documentation center. Alexandre Tcherkassov is a physicist and an engineer by training, as well as a prominent human rights defender and former chair of the Memorial Human Rights Center. Within over 2 decades of experience, he has played a key role in documenting human rights abuses, particularly in conflict zones as in Chechnya and the North Caucasus. He has focused his work on promoting accountability for war crimes and political repression, as well as defending the rights of marginalized groups in Russia, and he has been living in exile outside Russia since 2022. Now I would like to give the floor to our 3 esteemed guests and ask them to address the current situation in their home countries and the work of their organizations regarding today's meeting topic, defending the rule of law, defending human rights, and I invite Oleksandra Matviitchouk to speak at first. Thank you.
Thank you very much for providing me a floor. It's a huge honor for me to address to the distinguished audience. I'm a human rights lawyer, and I'm applying the law to defend people and human dignity for many years. But now I found myself in a situation when the law doesn't work. Russian troops are deliberately hitting residential buildings, schools, churches, museums, and hospitals. They're attacking evacuation corridors. They're torturing people in filtration camps. They're forcibly taking Ukrainian children to Russia. They're abducting, robbing, raping, and killing civilians in the occupied territories. And entire UN system of peace and security can't stop it. While this war turns people into the numbers, what we are literally doing, we are returning people their names, because people are not numbers, and life of each person matters. And being a human rights lawyer, I have a question. How we people who live in 21st century will defend human beings, their lives, their freedom, and their human dignity? Can we rely on the law, or does just brutal force matter? The answer to this question is important not just for people in Ukraine, in Sudan, in Iran, in Myanmar, in Nicaragua, or Venezuela. The answer to this question will define our common future. I don't know how historians in future will call this historical period. But the world order, which is based on UN Charter and international law, is collapsing before our eyes. Even my phone has an expiration date. UN system has never been reformed. It's just stolen. It's reproducing ritualistic movements. The work of Security Council is paralyzed. And now it's easy to predict that such fires like wars will emerge more and more often in different parts of the globe because the international wiring is faulty and sparks are everywhere. And when we speak about Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, this is not just a war between two states. This is a war between two systems, authoritarianism and democracy. And with this war, Putin attempts to convince the entire world that freedom, human rights, democracy, rule of law are fake values because they couldn't protect anyone during the war. Putin attempts to convince that country with a strong military potential and nuclear weapon can break the UN Charter, can dictate its rules to entire international community, and even forcibly changed internationally recognized borders. And if Putin succeeds, it will encourage other authoritarian leaders in different parts of the globe to do the same. We are losing freedom in the world. Last year, half of the population in the globe went to election. But don't be an illusion, 80% of people in the globe live in non-free or partially free societies. This means that people who have a real right to vote, for whom they want to vote, who have a real right to say what they want to say, such people are minority. And the problem is not just in the fact that in authoritarian countries, the space for freedom is shrinking to the size to the prison cell. The problem is that even in developed democracies, people start to put into question the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And there are reasons for this, because current generations, they inherited their freedom from their grandparents. They have never fought for it. They became consumers of democracy. They take human rights for granted. They consider freedom as a possibility to make a choice between different cheeses in supermarket. And that's why they start to easily exchange their freedom for economic benefits, for populist claims, and first and foremost, for their own comfort. And probably we can allow such behavior during the peaceful time, but I'm sorry, we are not in a peaceful time. The global storm is approaching, change is a new norm. It's very visible when we look to the rapid development of new technologies. Now people spend more and more time in digital reality, overloaded with fakes, hate, and disinformation. They become extremely vulnerable to external manipulation. They start to lose their ability to make a distinction between lie and truth. And now, even people who live in the same small community, they have no more a shared sense of reality. Without a shared sense of reality, they have no common actions. Without common actions, how we can protect our freedom and our democracy? But let me finish with a positive note. Being a human rights lawyer in a situation when the law doesn't work, I know that when you can't rely on the legal instruments or UN system of peace and security, you can still rely on people. We get used to thinking through the categories of states and interstate organizations, but ordinary people have a much greater impact than they can even imagine. Ordinary people can do extraordinary things. They can change history. Let me share with you one story. I interviewed Ukrainian professor on philosophy, a scientist, Igor Kozlovsky. He's originally from Donetsk. He spent 700 days in Russian captivity. Before that, I spoke with hundreds of people, men and women, who told me how they were beaten, raped, smashed into wooden boxes, their fingers were cut, their nails were torn away, their nails were drilled, there were electrical shocks through their genitalia. One woman told me how her eye was dragged out with a spoon. So it was little that could surprise me. But Professor Igor Kozlovsky mentioned a tale which was insignificant for the evidence base, but it impressed me. He mentioned how he was kept in solitary confinement in a tiny cell in a basement with no window, no fresh air, no light. It was very poorly ventilated. It was difficult for him to breathe. He had no idea if the night or the day is going on, and sewage flows on the dirty floor. And through the opening of the sewage, rats were crawling down. And this detail, which impressed me, he told how he gave lectures on philosophy to these rats, just to hear a sound of human voice, because he was kept alone for months and months. And legally, Igor Kozlovsky is a victim because he was abducted, illegally detained, and kept in inhuman conditions. He was tortured so severely that he had to learn how to walk again, but he told me that all his experience is not a reason for him to treat himself as a victim, because a basis of our existence is dignity, not victimhood. And dignity is action. Dignity means that you not just feel responsibility for everything which is going on, you take this responsibility to do the right things to change it for better. We are not hostages of the circumstances. We are participants of this historical process. Dignity provides us a strength to continue our fight even in unbearable conditions. And I'm here to say that despite everything, the story of Ukraine, it's a life-affirming story, because these dramatic times raise hope. Because when freedom is denied, it becomes powerfully break out through the every concrete individuals. And I'm here to say that our future is not just unclear, it's also not pre-written. This means that we still have a chance to fight for future, which we want for us and for our children. And I'm here to say that we still have a hope. And hope, it's not a confidence that everything will be fine. Hope, it's a deep understanding that all our efforts have a huge meaning. Thank you.
Hello. Good evening. Thank you so much for the invitation. My name is Natallia Satsounkevitch. I'm from Viasna, from Belarus. Thank you, Benjamin, for the introduction. So I will skip this part from my speech and move to the issues that I wanted to mention more. It's a great honor for me to be here today in Geneva, a city that symbolizes for me international solidarity and believe that law and rights should protect every human being, but not serve as an instrument of repression. I only want to mention that I joined Viasna more than 10 years ago. That was really a life-changing decision, and I'm very grateful and honored to be part of this team. These brave people that I met and work with, for many of them are not only my colleagues, but also friends. For almost 30 years, Viasna has been documenting human rights violations, assisting victims of political repressions, and advocating for the release of all political prisoners. We also campaign against death penalty in Belarus, provide human rights education for young people, and build a strong network of volunteers across the whole country. Viasna and its members have always spoken loudly and critically, so you can imagine that that has never been welcomed by Belarusian authorities. Over the years, we have faced numerous searches, arrests, trials, and criminal cases. Today, as it was mentioned, 4 of my colleagues from Viasna are in prison, including our founder and leader, Bialiatski, Nobel Peace Prize laureate. Tonight, I would like to share that what we are doing today, how we operate, and how we continue our mission in the face of repressions and war. Firstly, and maybe the most important in the terms of rule of law, is the documenting of torture and international responsibility. Since the first days of mass protests in 2020, Viasna has been systematically documenting torture and ill treatment committed against thousands of protesters. I can remember these days at our office in Minsk, where people were just coming after pretrial detention centers, beaten, and they need this possibility to speak with someone and to be documented, their story to be heard. I think I will never forget the first guy that I met there. We have collected hundreds of testimonies, medical reports, photos, and videos, and submitted to international bodies such as UN, OSCE, International Criminal Court, and several national jurisdictions in Europe, applying the principle of universal jurisdiction. Our materials have already served as the basis for investigations in Germany, Lithuania, Poland, Czech Republic, and others. It gives us hope that crimes against humanity that committed in Belarus will not go unpunished, even if justice inside the country is impossible today. Today, the Belarusian human rights community is actively working to develop international accountability mechanisms. Because only the acknowledging that truth and holding perpetrators to responsibility can we restore trust in law and in the very idea, this is the very idea of justice. That was mentioned that I'm not a lawyer by my education, but I can easily understand the essence of justice. For me, that means that perpetrators will be brought to responsibility and the rights of victims would be restored and recognized. Unfortunately, we face with another dimension of the Belarusian crisis is transnational repressions. The authorities extend their persecution beyond the country borders. They initiate criminal cases against exiled activists, requests extraditions, and threaten families who remain in Belarus. Such cases already affect hundreds of people, human rights defenders, journalists, volunteers, and lawyers. That shows that our struggle is not only a Belarusian issue, but part of a global effort to defend human rights. You can easily find Belarusian political prisoners here in Switzerland, also in Geneva. They are between us. We see that today the rule of law in Belarus is completely dismantled. When I started my human rights activities, I monitored court trials as a volunteer and saw the effect of independent observer in the courtroom, how it influences on the judge. Unfortunately, I should say that there were no independent court system in Belarus, and still there is no. Court trials are fully politically ruled. Independent courts no longer exist. Lawyers defending political prisoners are disbarred or imprisoned themselves. Human rights organizations and independent media are labeled as extremist formations. So that also happened with Viasna. A peaceful protest, an article, or even a small donation can lead to a prison sentence for everyone in Belarus. At this moment, more than 1,200 of people are political prisoners, and the number keeps growing. As I mentioned, among them are 4 of my colleagues, Viasna members. They and many others political prisoners are held in complete isolation, without letters, visits, or medical care. Torture, ill treatment, and death in custody continue with total impunity. As it was mentioned by Benjamin, I live in exile since 2021 after a criminal case was opened against me. I'm also in a wanted list both in Belarus and in Russia. And I can share that it's a very difficult personal experience when I can't go home and I can't hug my granny. She's 84 years old, actually a little bit older than UN. That celebrates 80th anniversary this year. But this, my personal story, brings me to a professional one. I can't go back home. I can't enjoy my life until there is a respect for human rights in Belarus. I was born and raised in a country where human rights are not respected. So my biggest dream is to see and to live in Belarus where human rights are respected really by authorities and people enjoy. Especially I'm a great fan and a kind of experts on freedom of peaceful assembly. I see how this right is interesting, how people exercise it. So that's my biggest dream. But despite all these conditions that I mentioned, with transnational repressions, deep human rights crisis in our country, Viasna continues its work. Our priorities remain the same: to document violations, assist victims, and seek international accountability for the crimes of regime. We maintain the largest database of political prisoners, monitor trials, and support families left without income or contact with their loved ones. We also work closely across the region. I should say that repressions in Belarus, the war against Ukraine, and the shrinking space for civil society in Russia are part of the same authoritarian trend. Our societies are connected, but not only by geography, but by shared experience and mutual support. And this Nobel Peace Prize Day ceremony, when we met in Oslo, that wasn't the first time when our organizations met and started to cooperate. Many dozens of years before, we cooperated and had a partnership. In conclusion, I want to say that defending the rule of law means defending human life, dignity, and the belief that justice must serve everyone, not only the powerful. Even from exile, we continue to fight for the future of Belarus. I'm deeply grateful to all who stand with us, those who listen, remember, and act. Because every word of support and every act of solidarity helps us keep going. Thank you.
Bonjour. Excusez-moi, mon anglais c'est crime de guerre. Mon français est pareil à crime contre l'humanité. Voilà pourquoi les organisateurs ont préparé la traduction de russe. Je ne sais pas, qu'est-ce que sera mieux, d'essayer de parler français ou parler russe? Je vais parler russe pour n'être pas lost in translation. Excusez-moi, s'il vous plaît. Огромное спасибо.
Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this event here in Geneva. The homeland of international humanitarian law. We've already spoken about this today. This is a complicated conversation happening at a time when the rule of law and international law, humanitarian law as well, the system of international security, international cooperation, all of this appears to be falling apart around us. Here we are today. My colleagues from Ukrainian and Belarusian associations. I'm here as a representative of Memorial. We're constantly being asked, how is it possible that we can have cooperation between organizations and governmental organizations in different countries at a time when one of these countries is an aggressor state? But that's the thing. Memorial, these are not Putin's people. Viasna are not Lukashenko's people. And civil society are not vassals of their lords. These are people who are working in the interest of other people, of international law. They don't belong to anyone. It's very difficult to prove this today. We have to prove many things that should be obvious. Memorial was created during the collapse of the USSR. It was created by young activists and by older dissidents. And they had a very simple goal, a very simple mission. And it was not to allow a return to totalitarianism. We failed. But we still are continuing to exist. We're continuing to work. Does that still have a point? But we're not the only ones who failed at our mission. The entire international cooperation system, which was created after the end of World War II, with a view to preventing any more great wars, that system failed its goal as well. As Memorial, we've been working for these 35 years in armed conflict zones in post-Soviet territories, during the USSR and in post-Soviet territories. And for the last 25 years, we have been doing the same thing over and over again and saying the same thing, that states that are violating human rights within their national borders will inevitably become a threat to international peace and security. It would seem that this is a lesson we've learned many times since World War II. But here we are. In 2008, the war in Georgia, beyond the borders of Russia. 2014, the aggression in Ukraine. 2015, Russia participates in the Syrian war. These crimes that were committed during these wars are the continuation of those crimes that were committed during previous wars. In Chechnya, for example, the First and Second Chechnya Wars, where tens of thousands of people died and thousands disappeared. So they were abducted, they were tortured, and then killed. We're seeing the same thing now, in a broader sense, in Ukraine. Why is that even possible? Because the crimes of the past were left unpunished, the crimes committed in Chechnya. And a number of issues on Chechnya, we addressed the European Court for Human Rights. And they issued decisions. Russia paid money to the defendants, and this is essentially a tax on impunity. And not a single person who committed these crimes was punished. The approaches weren't changed. What did Europe do? What did Strasbourg do? The only thing they did was they said that Russia must finally carry out the decisions of the court. The inefficiency of the international legal system is another fact that we know today. Is there anything to say? Is there anything to say about prizes? "50 years ago, the Nobel Peace Prize was given to the academic Andrei Sakharov for his efforts to fight for human rights in the Soviet Union. He was the sort of person who worked in much more difficult situations. When he received the Nobel Peace Prize, he was in the USSR. And he was in court, where his colleague Sergei Kovalov, the chair of the Russian Memorial, a Soviet dissident who spent 10 years in prison camps and in exile, who then fought for human rights in Chechnya. This was when Russia was being reborn after totalitarianism. So his colleague was then in court being judged. The slogan of the Soviet dissidents was, "For the success of our hopeless work." But their work wasn't all that hopeless, and it was continued by Oleksandra Matviitchouk here. One of her teachers was a colleague of Kovalov, a Ukrainian dissident who then was also imprisoned together with Kovalov. It's very important, the work that Viasna is now carrying out, and the Center for Civil Liberties. That's naming every name, not allowing us to turn tragedies into statistics, to provide an opportunity for justice in the future. Memorial is continuing its work, together with our colleagues, together with our Ukrainian colleagues. We're currently publishing a large report based on the work of my colleagues, one of whom spent some time in one of Putin's prisons for calling Putin a fascist leader, and that is Oleg Orlov. He's the current co-chair of Memorial. This work is ongoing, and it's not hopeless. It's just as hopeless as the work of Jean-Henri Dunant, who founded the Red Cross. This is one of the people who founded the international humanitarian movement. At the time, we could have said that all of this work was insanity and there was no way to find a way out of this situation when hundreds of people were dying of diseases. The only thing we could have done then, some said that at the time the only thing we could do was lose our minds. Dunant at the time is one of the first Nobel Peace Prize laureates, and he didn't think it was hopeless. We are inspired by the city of Geneva as well, and those who come from the city of Geneva. The fact that there are simple things that we can do now to help specific people, to help political prisoners, to help refugees. And that's how Dunant began his work. When he was still in school, on Saturdays he went to prisons and he read out loud to the prisoners. These are very simple things to do to help specific people. And even when international law is collapsing in front of us, the legal system is collapsing, many things are collapsing. This is something we can use to build a new foundation, a foundation that would be more sturdy. Thank you, and I apologize that I didn't speak French.
I would like to thank all three participants of our roundtable for their statement at the beginning. And we have agreed to have a short conversation here on the podium for about 20 minutes. And then we will open for questions from the audience. And we decided to talk about two topics. So the first topic that we agreed to speak about is what you have already mentioned in all your three presentations. And that is the question of cooperation and the question of mutual perspectives. So I think all of you have mentioned that it was not the first time in 2022 when the three organizations received the Nobel Peace Prize that you appeared together on a scene. So I would like all the three of you to share with us how in the past and how in the present the work of the other organizations is important for you. Because as we have, I think now all understood, is that you all three are in an extremely challenging biographical situation, either being in exile, either being unable to go home and hug the grandmother, or unable to unlock the door of one's home apartment in your hometown, or because living in a country that has been experiencing war for over 10 years now. So I would like to invite you to share with us how the work of the other organizations, of your friends, of your partners, is important for your work.
I will start with providing a context of our joint work to make understand the importance of joint efforts. For current moment, Russia occupied approximately 20% of Ukrainian territories. And it one task to occupy the territories, but another task to save control under this territory. So in order to save control, Russia uses a terror against civilians. Russia physically exterminates active local people there. Mayors, journalists, children writers, teachers, priests, environmentalists, like any active people of community, and build this network of places of detention where people are tortured to death. So just to turn tragedy into concrete human, not to statistic, I will tell you my personal story. This summer, I occasionally met a 5-year-old girl. We work with her mother case. Her mother was illegally abducted in occupied territories. She's civilian, but she has pro-Ukrainian sympathy, which is okay for citizens of Ukraine to have pro-Ukrainian sympathy. It's not a crime, but she was detained, and it's a very horrible case because this young woman went through the multiple gang rape, and then she was illegally deported to Russia and faced fabricated criminal proceedings. And probably someone told that I'm a big person to this young girl, being a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, because she hugged me, she started crying, and she started to begging me, please return my mom. And I feel broken because being a professional lawyer, I have no tools how to release her mom and dozens of thousands of other illegally detained civilians and prisoners of the war. Once again, according to international humanitarian law, Russia has no right to detain civilians, but Russia did. So the only way for us to identify where these people are, to provide them some support, if it's possible, to send parcels or treatment, medical treatment, if it's possible, to provide independent lawyer who can't change the verdict of the Russian court, but at least they will give information what's going on with this person to his or her family. It's our brave Russian human rights colleagues. And let me tell that I know that it's a very vulnerable position because Russian human rights defenders, they face not just with Putin regimes, they face with a majority of Russian citizens, with a general opinion, because unfortunately, majority of Russian citizens, they support any action of their government. It's very understandable. It's the always problem with authoritarian regime. They can have a huge population, but very less citizens, because citizen, it's not people with passports. Citizen is a people with responsibility. So thank you once again for this. And I think that it's just continuation of the dissident tradition, as Alexandra rightly mentioned before, when dissidents from different countries of the Soviet Union built these invisible ties from their own societies in order to fight for freedom and human dignity in situation when the law doesn't work. And now we are doing the same. We just cooperate with each other, try to help people to survive and to combat this evil which once again start to dominate in our part of the globe. And I will finish with one quote from Russian human rights colleagues, which I love very much, because once I asked them how we can help you, part of our colleagues have to leave the country, like Alexander. Part of our colleagues are in Russian prison. part of them still working under the constant threat to be tomorrow in our joint lists. And I got an answer. If you want to help us, please be successful. Because only success of Ukraine will provide a chance for democratic future in Russia itself. There is no guarantees, and chance is not 100% of guarantees, but it's a huge luxury to have a chance.
Thank you for your question. I keep in mind two issues. 10 years ago, we were going to Russia and Ukraine for kind of study visits to monitor peaceful assemblies, just to have an idea how it goes in other countries, the context, to have more experience. It was super nice, a lot of fun. Not only monitoring, but a lot of conversations, discussions, and bars, of course. But last year, the times changed, the challenges and others, so we did a common study with Ukrainian colleagues about Ukrainian children deported through the territory and temporary based in territory of Belarus, and then deported to Russia. We try to find as many facts as we can, to find names and to have the whole picture. So the times are different, but the cooperation is rather the same. We still have the partnership, the support, and the common goals. Yeah, we speak the same language of human rights. Thank you.
Et à ce moment-là, peut-être je vais dire quelques mots en français. Parce que nous avons déjà discuté sur ça avec mes collègues.
At this point, I'm going to say a few words in French because we discussed this with our colleagues.
Oui, mon français, c'est crime contre l'humanité. Понимаете?
Well, you should understand something. This cooperation has a long history. It started before Memorial, long before. And when 60 years ago a poet was arrested, Julian Daniel, one of the first who actually went to court, Daniel and Sinyavsky was actually the first anti-dissident court hearing, and then he went to Moldovan prison camps, and well, he didn't find it difficult to survive there because he met with Ukrainian poets whom he was translating, actually, because he was a translator. And well, there were collective protests and a collective hunger by Marxists from Leningrad at that time, who were spending time at that same prison camp. There were nationalists from the Baltic countries. And, well, apart from people from Moscow, there was Yuri Shukhevich, Ukrainian fighter. So they were together, and the dissident movement was about being together. The wives of Ukrainian political prisoners would go to see their husbands in Mordovia, which is a republic of the former Soviet Union, through Moscow and other cities. So Memorial started not only in Russia but also in Ukraine. So the Kharkiv human rights group is headed by Yurian Zakharov, is one of the most steadfast organizations. I met him last week, and this is part of Memorial too. And when Ukraine had the Maidan manifestations, well, we understood that in Kiev somebody is fighting with the evil that we are fighting against. And we were wishing all the best to those who were fighting against totalitarianism getting back. And this is very important for a great number of Russian people. This is still important today when we're living through a grand war. Russians were supporting Ukrainians who were actually moved to Russia, who had nowhere else to run away to, and they helped them go on to Europe after ending up in Russia. And now, if we talk about helping prisoners and civilian hostages, this is something most important that Russian people are doing who are fighting for human rights. So evil is something international here. Our Russian evil has an international character, but fighting against evil is a mission of an international level. Let us try to be together. Well, there is one caveat here. Nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. We're trying to coordinate anything we say with our Ukrainian colleagues. We do not pronounce anything before talking to them. Well, we don't have any success for the time being. That's a different thing, but otherwise it's not difficult to coordinate.
Is postpone success, let's say like this.
Thank you so much. This was most impressive, and I think many in the room. I think I think you would share with me this insight that many here in the West are not aware of these invisible links that you have been describing. I would like to turn to a second subject, and this brings us into the perspective. And what I tried to mention in my short introduction is that democracy, the rule of law, human rights are under threat not only in Eastern Europe. You have mentioned it quite impressively in your statement that we are currently facing a global phenomenon, a global crisis of democracy, of the rule of law, of human rights, of the international order. So my question to you would be, what can people in the West learn from your experience? Because what we are now experiencing, and also in many Western countries, is a disintegration, a social disintegration. Also, that people don't understand the threat to democracy that is arising. So, my question to you would be, what can we learn? What can we learn in our society from your experience, from your engagement? And secondly, how can we be supportive? How can we be supportive? How can we help you fighting the fight that you're fighting in your countries?
I was in Kiev when Russian troops tried to circle my city. I refused to evacuate, and with a part of my team, we continued our work on the ground. It was a very difficult time. I remember that we celebrated every morning in first weeks of large-scale war like a victory, because we managed to stand one more night. And it was a time that not just Putin, but also our international partners were confident that Ukraine has no right to resist to such enormous opposing power. Russia was the 11th economy in the world. Russia has nuclear weapon, strong military potential, veto power in UN Security Council, oil and gas, which means a lot of money. So I witnessed how international organizations evacuated their personnel, even international humanitarian organizations. They left us alone. But ordinary people remained. And ordinary people started to do extraordinary things. It were ordinary people who helped to survive under artillery's fire. It were ordinary people who took people out from the ruined cities. It were ordinary people who break through the encirclement to provide humanitarian aid, and suddenly it became obvious that ordinary people fighting for their freedom and human dignity are stronger than even the second army in the world. I mentioned this story of beginning of large-scale war with a purpose because Putin assessed Ukraine through the mathematics prism. He and his surrounding just evaluated our resources in numbers. But optics of Western society also was wrong because they evaluated Ukraine just from the strengths of our state institutions, and this optic failed because, I'm sorry, we restored our independence only 3 decades ago. After collapse of Soviet Union, we have never had the luxury to have a sustainable state institutions. We're in process to build them. Both sides don't see people. This is the main lessons learned. Once again, people have power. Ordinary people can do extraordinary things and conduct the simple actions on which we can build something more essential, as Alexander previously mentioned. So I think at first, which I want to share. Second, I mentioned in my speech that current generations start to take human rights for granted and perceive freedom like an oxygen, that it will exist forever. You don't even have to think about it, just breathe and that's all. I would like to mention about another part of the problem. The modern authoritarian regimes, they have no common ideology, but they promote common narratives. They attack truth. They try to convince that authoritarianism means strength and effectiveness, while democracy means weakness and slowness. They attack humanistic ideas like freedom of speech, independent courts, human rights, and democracy as such. And they found, unfortunately, a lot of supporters in democratic societies because people are disappointed with democracy. Because democracy is not ideal. Democracy still haven't provide the total comfort, and a lot of problems are very sharp and remained unsolved. For example, social inequality. So please hear us from the Eastern Europe, who restored our independence just 3 decades ago and got a chance for democratic reforms just 12 years ago. You have 2 tasks to do in parallel: to protect your democracy and to perfect your democracy. You have no other choice. Authoritarian regime don't solve these problems either. The only difference that people have no right to complain. The alternative to your even imperfect democracy is half of the authoritarianism. And third, I'm sorry for being long. I'm not in a position to tell what you can do to support Ukraine. You know better. You know your background, you know your environment, you can find a topic which is more close to your heart. Let me finish with one message. We need your help. Please hear me. We need your help. I'm not expecting that you will stop your work and 8 working hours per day will work for Ukraine. I'm not an illusion, but please do something. we really need your help. And there are hundreds of ways how to be useful in this situation.
Thank you. I would like to share that every act of solidarity is really important. Especially it's important for Belarus. During the last 5 years, and dozens more before, we see how it works, the pressure of international solidarity and attention. We see how it changes the treatment to political prisoners in prison if they are under international attention, if they receive, for example, letters of solidarity and support. And we see that during the last 5 years, thanks to your support, Belarus is still on the top of discussions and international support. That's very important. Very simple, but very first steps to do, to know and to spread this information for other people. Thank you very much for your time today and attention. Thank you.
Я бы хотел
like to say this. What is going on in Ukraine today is touching upon Europe. It has to do a lot with Europe. It's not only about tanks on fire in Ukraine that were created, that were produced many years ago for the Soviet army to be able to attack Western Europe and stop at the Atlantic Ocean. Well, in the past months, we see something absolutely crazy. Well, there's a possibility that Russian aggression will spill over to other countries, and well, it's a little bit more than the beginning of Grand War in the beginning of 1922. Let us remind ourselves of the experience of Eastern Europe. I'm talking about the countries that lived through the Soviet occupation back in 1939, 1940. I'm talking about the experience of countries where Soviet tanks actually rolled in later, after 1945. And I believe that Europe has a good memory. In Western Europe, some people understand that, well, actually, this may affect Western Europe too, but not many people understand this. I believe that many people see the war in Ukraine as somebody else's war, a war that is far, far away, but it's not far away. It may affect every one of us. If you don't stop aggression there, it will come here to your homes. And nothing will save you. Neutrality will not, other things will not, and something, well, that is going on in Ukraine has relevance to Europeans. Many years ago, I believe people thought the same way. They thought, well, this is not our war, this is not about us, but this is about us. It is, unfortunately, about all of us. And while we have lost decades when we could have prevented this aggression. And right now, we should not close our eyes to this. I believe that this is the most important thing that is worth saying, judging by our experience. Dictatorships, aggression is always relevant to you, to me. It's not far away.
Thank you for these very strong statements. And we have about 15 minutes left for questions from the audience. And I think we have microphones in the conference hall. There is one over here and one over there. And who would like to ask a question, please? The young man in the red, coat.
Thank you very much for this very open-minded and interesting conference. I'd like to address my question to Mr. Tcherkassov, and to help this, I can do it in Russian. Господин Черкасов,
Mr. Tcherkassov,
большое спасибо, что вы
thank you very much for finding time. I'm over here, here in the middle. I wanted to ask you something. You were talking about the inefficiency of the international system. Multilateralism is not working, you said, and so on. In Europe and so on. But do you think that if we are talking about dignity, about humanitarian approaches, we should not give up these things? The Roman status, democracy, multilateralism, even if there is a crisis, even if there is populism. I don't believe that we should give up these notions. I believe that we should actually, well, see these values as very important. Well, did I say that these values are not important? You said values, valeurs. They are important. Maybe the instruments, the tools are not efficient. That's a different question. And there is not a single military criminal in prison after the Chechen War. And, well, the Strasbourg court has not done anything, but I believe that, on the other hand, we have created a fundamental basis for those who carry out war crimes will not get away. And I believe that this will apply to those who are criminals in Ukraine, and at least 2 people were brought before court in the Hague, well, because they had shot down the Malaysian airliner and 300 people lost their lives. But on the 17th of July of 2014, we and Strasbourg could not prevent that crime. Unfortunately, as the French say, désolé. Values are important, that's right. They may be more important in the situation when tools are marking time. And I wanted to compare something. When you have a map that is changing all the time, what can you do? Who could have thought a year ago that the US would be giving up their support of Ukraine? Well, we see that legislations are changing, everything is changing, but there is a constant that is not changing, and this constant is the values that you were referring to. Well, Jack Sparrow from the movie had a compass, and it didn't point to the north, it pointed to something that was most important for him. And I believe that this is the kind of compass that we should have. Because whenever maps are changing, whenever there is a fog of war, well, this compass would show us where our values lie. And there is one more tool from Jack the Sparrow. Well, he had a pipe to which he could see, and I believe that we should have our optical tools that would be focused at the human dimension, at humans. Well, we are discussing abstractly institutions, geopolitics, politics, whatnot. but I believe that we need something to help specific people, and something very important might grow out of this. And Jean-Henri Dunant actually wanted to help people, and he saw that many people thought that it was impossible to help people, and he actually created the Red Cross and the Geneva Convention to protect the wounded, the sanitary services of the Red Cross. Well, in the end of the 19th century, they were stronger than relevant or respective services of some armies. And this was a miracle. A miracle because he was focused on specific people and specific actions. These are the tools that are very important for us. Maps are changing, and artificial constructs are changing, as the court in The Hague, Strasbourg, New York, the United Nations, and so on. They are not working as they should, and we must focus on humans. So there is no contradiction between what you said and what I said.
Thank you. I take one more question. Please, the man with the hat in the last row.
First of all, thanks for this very interesting conference. I have one question about the closure of Russia today in the European Union. In your opinion, is it a dangerous fact that we close a channel, even if it's from Russia? Because in my opinion, it's still some not authoritarian act against freedom of speech, I would say. But I would be very interested to have your opinion about that.
Do you mean the change in the visa regime that has... in the TV channels. Okay. Who would like to answer?
Let's maybe first. I just asked colleagues, probably we will turn the line, but I know that people start to understand that the war is going on only when the bombs falls on their heads. But war has not just military, a lot of other dimensions. Economic dimension, value dimension, cyber dimension, trade dimension, and informational dimension. And in informational dimension, the war is going for your hearts and minds. And in this regard, this war, long time ago, has crossed the borders of your country and European Union. So you are in a war in this dimension. And according to European Convention, freedom of speech can be limited. It's not but it has to be for sure the strict criteria how to limit freedom of speech, and according to this criteria, the European Court on Human Rights decided the cases and disputes about freedom of speech. So we in Ukraine, we closed Russian TV channel because it's not freedom of speech. It's incitement to genocide. We sent a submission to International Criminal Court. We analyzed the speeches of top 7 Russian propagandists, and we asked International Criminal Court to open the criminal case because it's not just fake. These words kill. They encourage people to commit crimes in Ukraine, and they create the image of enemy from ordinary people in Ukraine. And then in result, we have And I strongly recommend to see the film Intercepted, which was based on the I forget the English word. I forget in Russian as well. Captures of the phone conversations of Russian soldiers with their families, and it shows several horrible things. First, Russian families completely aware about crimes, and second, they encourage them to do it. So the word kills. And this was our decision, and I think if I will present this case in European Court of Human Rights, I will find the strong legal argument to prove this reach of this criteria. But it's just a short-term strategy, because you can't isolate informational space. So it's a short-term strategy which need us to think, but what is a long-term strategy? How we can protect our hearts and minds, not just from Russian propaganda, I mean from different types of external manipulation. We can't just ban everything. It's not a method. And unfortunately, there is no simple answers, because we just return to something which we start for our own responsibility, to spend times to examine the things and to get our own conclusions, either truth or lie. And I'm sorry, vast majority of people are not doing this. It's a human nature. So a long-term strategy has to be education. I mean civil education. To tell people that this is their civil obligation. And I wish I know the simple answer to this difficult question. Unfortunately, I don't. But I think that without this long-term strategy, we all can fail. Because if you wear the red glasses, you see the world in red color. So if they will ingrain in your hearts and minds, they will dictate their actions and decisions for you.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, and I will pass the floor to Frédéric Esposito, who will say a few words at the end.
I would like to thank in the name of the Human Rights Week Committee. I would like to thank strongly Alexandra, Natallia, and Alexandre for what you said. You brought hope tonight in Geneva, but not as a flagship, as a weapon, as a sword against tyranny. Also hope as an attitude to stand strongly, even though you are facing difficult situation in your home country, but also as a way to remind us that at our level, everyone, each at his level, can do something to not only support you, but also to support the idea of freedom and of human rights. So for this, thank you so much again for what you said tonight here in Geneva. Before that, I announce very shortly, as you can see, it's on the screen, the next events that we have are in the human rights. We'd like, first of all, to thank our translators that help to keep the quality of the discussion. Thank you so much, both of you. And as you know, we have a series of events, more than 20 of them. And as an example, tomorrow we have lectures, musical lectures, 6 heures aux portes du Caire. It's supported by militants, other human rights defenders. Nous avons aussi, we also have la question, I will change in French. Nous allons aussi faire le procès de l'état de droit avec nos étudiantes et nos étudiants, puisqu'effectivement, l'état de droit peut-il aussi se défendre face aux accusations dont il peut être victime. Et c'est un exercice pas uniquement théorique, mais il oblige à revisiter les fondamentaux qui font que nous pouvons parler librement ce soir. Et enfin, nous terminerons avec un sujet assez dense, avec la question des violences policières, un danger pour nos démocraties, pour celles et ceux qui habitent la région, mais pas que. Vous le savez que Genève, Vaud, mais aussi Berne, récemment, dans le cadre de mouvements de manifestations, de soutien, notamment à la question palestinienne, cette question est apparue de façon assez violente, assez brutale, et poser la question, c'est aussi de façon fondamentale questionner la capacité d'un État et d'une démocratie à fixer l'équilibre entre démocratie et sécurité. Voilà pour le programme. Vous avez aussi, au travers du QR code, l'ensemble des événements auxquels vous pourrez accéder. Et merci encore à toutes et à tous d'être présents ce soir. And once again, thank you to our human rights defender. Thank you so much.